Hello, and thank you for coming to my talk. So as Vinci Lombardi said, it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. So you can guess our focus is going to be on getting up. So let's look at the cyber attack scenario in a bow tie diagram. So we have cyber incidents in the middle of it. For example, unauthorized access to the engineering workstations in order to manipulate the configurations. On the left side of it, we have cyber threat actions, which is done by potential threat actors, such as insider threats, hacktivists, criminals, and we have initiating event frequency. For that, we have proactive barriers, which is based on prevent and detect. So if we look on the right side of it, we have consequences. So consequences can be loss of view, loss of control, shutting down the process controllers. So before some of the consequences, we have safeguards. So safeguards means if left side proactive barriers are failed, how resilient you are. Can you recover, respond and recover from a cyber attack? So when we talk mostly about recovery, it's all about backup and restoration. However, disaster recovery has many aspects. So it is invoked by emergency response team in a reaction to interruption of normal production. So the activities is followed from the activation to not activation phase till the reconstitution phase. So in the phase of activation and notification phase, usually disasters are announced and assessed. Then on the recovery phase, usually we recover our technical functions which are impacted by the disaster. Then we do the production restart in the reconstitution phase. So what is the elements of the disaster recovery process? So most of them are well known, such as RTU, RPU, MTD, and then we have restoration process. Restoration process includes roles and responsibilities. You might know ICS for ICS, and it includes loss scenarios, recovery sequence, reconstitutions, and recovery test. So since most of the elements are well known, my focus is going to be on the loss scenarios, which invokes a disaster recovery process, and then optimal recovery sequence for each of the identified loss scenarios in order to optimize the reconstitution time. So before going to start, the first thing to ask, what is a disaster? What kind of cyber incident can be called a disaster? So let's take first process safety, because process safety has already well-established procedures in place. So in process safety, we have emergency shutdown system. So the main purpose of the emergency shutdown system is to initiate some measures in order to reduce the hazard, fire, toxic explosion. So basically, it shuts down the equipment, process unit, it shuts down the plant if it enters dangerous state. So, but ESD has a different levels of it. So the first one, ESD3. So ESD3, when there is a deviation of outside operating limits of the package or of the equipment. So it shuts down the equipment. Then ESD2 is outside of operating limits of a process unit. So ESD3 and ESD2 both corresponds to the process upsets and then also to the well-contained incidents, but they are not immediately causing the threat to the safety of the personnel. When we move to the ESD1, we have an emergency situation, so which means we need to bring our plant to the predefined state. Then we have an ESD0, which means decision to abandon the facility. So if we look from ESD3 till ESD0, it is going up according to the criticality of the hazard. So let's take this example from the process safety and apply to the loss scenarios in the cybersecurity. So process safety protects human from the machines, cybersecurity protects machines from the human, yeah? There is a little bit difference, but we still can apply the same methodology. So in cybersecurity, we have a shutdown 3. So in shutdown 3, it's an anomaly incident. So it is a local incident. We don't have a process downtime. Then we have a SD2, which means we have a noteworthy cyber incident. It is a still local incident. We have loss of impaired support function, and then we have some of the loss of ability to perform. And then process downtime is a less than recovery time objective. Then we have SD1. So this is a extensive incident. It is affecting multiple functions. So we have loss of essential functions, loss of interconnections, loss of ability to perform. We can still do the manual operation, and the process downtime is less than maximum tolerable downtime. Then we have SD0. So SD0 is a major cyber incident where manual operation is not possible. It is impacting the multiple locations, and we have lost the data exchange between essential functions. So the process downtime is more than MTD, more than maximum tolerable downtime. So disasters are considered those loss scenarios which result in a shutdown more than MTD. For example, if you have MTD 1 day from your business impact analysis, it means disaster is, when you have a shutdown more than MTD, it means it is a disaster. So this is the SD0 loss scenarios invokes the disaster recovery process and emergency response team. Now we have identified what is the criteria for the disasters. What kind of cyber attack scenarios causes those disasters? So in this talk, we're not including natural disasters. We're not including disaster caused by fire, by toxic, by explosions. We're only focusing on cyber attack scenarios. So we need to identify what kind of cyber attack scenarios causes those loss scenarios with likelihood based on historical occurrences. So it can be destruction of field device firmware. It can be destruction of network device firmware. So it is unlikely, which means there is a low likelihood in our industry. Then destruction of network device operating systems, for example, Cisco iOS, which is possible and which is happening, such as targeted attacks by nation-state threat actors. Then I have a mistypo here. This is a loss of network performance and network connections. And then full encryption or disk wipe of all network-connected essential functions. So both these attack scenarios are likely, which means very frequent in our industry. Example can be ransomware attack. So in the perfect world, you have to identify those loss scenarios in your risk assessment, not when you're doing your disaster recovery strategy. So once you have identified your loss scenarios, now it's time to build a recovery strategy in order to minimize the time required to restore the technical functions and optimize the reconstitution time. So again, coming back to the process safety startup. So we have talked about ESD, and ESD must be compatible with the restart procedure. So meaning that from the full black shutdown to the full production up. So process safety has initial. This is used when the process is going to start for the first time after the pre-commissioning and commissioning stage. Then we have a unit or process we use if we want to start only one particular system. Then we have a black start. So black start is similar as initial. However, we use black start during any life cycle of the plant. So when we use a black start, usually when we lose the power out, when we have a power outage and all our systems are down, and we need to bring our essential systems according to the sequential manner. For example, you can see from here, for example, we start power on the cabinets by connecting the lead to PDU. So when we power on the cabinets, our, let's say, backbone switch comes up. Then we power on our domain controllers DC based on sequence. For example, if you have level 3 DC or if you have level 2 DC, you will start from the level 3 DC. Then you will start powering on level 3 devices, and then the list continues on. So let's take this sequential startup and apply to the cybersecurity strategy. In cybersecurity strategy, for the recovery sequence, compared with process safety, we're not focusing on the device startup. We're focusing on functions. So what does it mean, functions? One workstation, for example, might have safety instrumented system, BPCS, or fire and gas functions. Why we need to focus on functions? Because consequences are different. Or we might have a server cluster which has a logging, DC, APC, historian, alarm, and so on. So once we have identified our functions, now we can move on to identify our recovery sequence. So the recovery priority identifies the recovery sequence. How we identify the priority? We identify our essential functions first. So for example, in priority 1, which are our essential functions, we have SIS, we have FGS, we have DCS, metering, and we have network devices which are supporting those functions. And then we move on to the priority 2. For example, priority 1 is a sequence 1, then the priority 2 is a sequence 2. Process analyzer, historian, PCCTV, and it goes to the priority 3 and to priority 4. Here, we need to keep in mind that dependency also affects the priority. Why we need to identify the dependency? In order to make sure the integrity and operability of the system restoration. How we can identify the dependencies? So dependencies are mostly identified based on the type of interconnections. For example, domain trust, or logical physical controls between system, or connectivity between system. So let's look at here. This is what I have identified, what you need to look for the dependencies. For example, direct dependency on A. Let's say you have a console which is dependent from the server. Indirect dependency on A. For example, you have historian server C, which is dependent on OPC interface B, which is dependent on DCS server A. Then you have codependency on B. This case, for example, you might not have a redundancy, and B might be a single switch. Then you have interdependency, which means you might have a redundant database syncing. Then you have codependency of B, C, D, E on A. Example can be B, C, D, E can be your host-based machines, which are relying on DNS within the DC, if you don't have local host files. And redundant dependency of A on B, C, D, E, if you have redundant network, or for example, hypervisor middle layer over a cluster of servers. So once you have identified your dependency, you need to now start recovering your functions. So recovery can be driven, can be process unit driven recovery, or it can be system driven recovery. So let's look at the process unit driven recovery. Here, I'm assuming that you have already spares is available, and you have eradication methods also. Eradication methods meaning, are you going to replace the hard drive? Are you going to replace the equipment? Or are you going to just start from the clean sheet configurations? So let's start with the business process boilers. So the potential impact is a plant-wide steam, and then 24 hours. So what kind of functions are supporting, what kind of functions is supporting this business process? It's a DCS and SIS, it can be machine monitoring systems, and the list goes on. And then you break down these functions to the subsystems. For example, in DCS, you might have server, console, controller, and transmitter. And sequence is usually based on which vendor you are using. And then you break down the safety instrumented system in the same way. Again, you might start workstation first, you might start controller first. It's again based on the type of equipment you're using. And another one is a system-driven recovery. As you can see, it is similar to the process unit-driven recovery. However, process unit-driven recovery is better because you are focusing on mission-critical processes. So once you have recovered, once you have finished your execution of recovery phase, you move on to the reconstitution. So reconstitution is a process in order to correct the recovery point deviation required for the process restart. So reconstitution might not be the responsibility of the cybersecurity team, but it is required for the process restart. What a cybersecurity team needs to know, that they need to know the overlap between the system recovery and when the controllers are ready to restart. So what kind of steps we might perform during the reconstitution phase? We might be validating control modes. We might be validating controller set points, for example, flow control, flows, pressure levels. We might be validating controller outputs. For example, if BPCS loop in a manual mode, we need to make sure the output in the correct positions. We need to make sure that the process sequence is correct, and reestablishing the alarm modes and limits, especially it depends from the last backup. When you took the last backup, the limits might be different. And then these alarms usually are fed by the external sources, which means you need to make sure that these links are functional. Then you might test functionality and process safety, meaning that if you have a primary vendor, let's say, and it has integration with a third-party system. So you need to make sure that it is also operational. You check your advanced control models, automation system status, and synchronization of actual process state. For example, for synchronization, maybe you're checking the controller is synchronizing with the server. Also, this is from process related. From cybersecurity perspective, you might check the signatures of the AV and IDS. You might check the user accounts. You might check the links are up and running, and also the logs that there is no anomaly incidents are there. So once you have completed your reconstitution process, now you are ready to restart. So what is the key takeaways here? So the larger disaster recovers are so much more than the restoration from backups. Yes, you might have the best practice 3-2-1 backup strategy. You might be practicing your restoration, but if you have a larger disaster recovery, you need to make sure that you have a recovery sequence, automation functions, recovery priorities, and dependencies. And then once you have done all of your recovery, don't forget the reconstitution of the production process. Coming back to the Vinci Lombardi, again, it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. Here I would like to say that you need to first create your worst case cyber attack scenarios in order to be prepared. Not all the cyber incidents leads to the disaster, only some of them with its own likelihood based on the historical occurrences. So I think I'm ending very early, but that's okay, which means I have more time for the questions and answers. If you have questions, it's better to come to the mic and speak.
Hello, I'll start off with the first question. Traditionally in IT, we say that DR, disaster recovery, is a subset of the BC. Business continuity plan. So in OT context, where does that BC and lies, or is it covered in the DR plan that you suggest?
So in OT, usually we have emergency response plan, we have emergency response process, then crisis management plan. They're all separate. Then we have incident response plan. Then we have disaster recovery strategies that I have shown you. Then we have disaster recovery process, meaning more detailed technical, it has a more technical details, how you're going to restore from backups. Okay. So like around 6-7 documents. But the IT, yes, covers usually BCP and BIA.
Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the questions. In terms of testing this process in a live environment, I guess it's pretty hard to do. Yeah. So what's the best way of putting these to a test if you've never done this during commissioning phases and things like that?
Usually, so I can just share my experience from the Black Start. So we did during the Greenfield, before the we call it ready for operation. So before the integration, we have executed Black Start. So the best case during the Greenfield, after the commissioning stage, If not, you can try using the virtualization test beds or during the turnaround time. Yeah.
Cool.
Because, for example, for Blackstar, during the brownfield, it's almost
Pretty
near
hard.
to impossible.
Near impossible.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So you mentioned a lot of different plans that, different documents that are available there. What are some typical organizational roles of people who will be involved in creating those plans and like the plan that you talked about today?
So disaster recovery strategies that I have shared, usually, in my opinion, it cannot be done by IT team. It's usually done with the process people. So you do it together because you have to identify your functions, meaning in which stations, what kind of functions you have, and you need to identify the priority, meaning what is the essential functions, meaning what is the essential process from the process perspective. So it should be done with the people who are on the plant, with the people. If it is an IT person, but he should be talking with the plant people. I always say the people who are responsible from level 3.5 firewall responsible to the PC process control network and down, not up.
I'll ask the question. I can't get the mic, but if it's a multi-site environment, multiple plants for an enterprise, is there a level of customization across plants, or does a process like this with that documentation cover?
So level of plant, meaning I can give you an example. For example, in each plant, if you have different processes, for example, offshore and gas treatment plant, let's say you have 2 plants, right? The 2 plants has different processes and 2 plants has different consequences. So which means, yes, you need to have 2 different recovery strategy because process installation is different. But if you have 5 gas treatment plants with the same process installation, yes, you might put it in one document, generalized form. And then it should be the same process installation, meaning the same systems are used. Okay, so if no more questions, thank you very much for attending my talk.